all the Google translation.
Okay, all Google translation. So we can translate everything back into the core language being English, because that's how the IPTC structure is built.
Thank you.
And obviously bear in mind, we can do this voice transcription as well. Okay, so this is everything I've talked about at the moment is all about a post hoc investigation. Okay, so you know something has happened. Okay, and so for example, we've got some friends in the room from a company called Oculus Financial Investigation who use it. That one there, and that one there. And there's a question, I think, at the... There's a question?
Yes, just a question. So step one, where you identify the...
Jeppy, hold on one sec. We need to get your microphone.
It's okay. Here you go. I needed the exercise.
Okay. So I have a question about step one,
Yep.
where you identify the words,
Yep.
the search terms. Is that just all? I just don't get it. Is it all communication you're looking at from a group of people, for example, and you just see which words they use? Or is this based on, does this identify already now where they use it in another context or in some anonymous?
All of the
Do
above.
you understand my question? So what is behind step one, where you just get the words,
Okay, so
where your system can help you find the search terms?
okay, so basically we build some IT infrastructure, and we take a corpus of data that can be any form of digital communication, and we ingest it into our system. The first thing it does, it identifies who spoke to who, and then it looks at each of the communications, and it will identify each word and its meaning and its sentiment. And then we allocate that into, we've got this capability to do entity extraction as well, so you can start to see what it means. So if you take, for example, the word well, let's use the word Jordan. So we work in a case in the Middle East. Jordan can be a pair of trainers, it could be a person, and it can be a country, and it could be, someone said to me, a bad actress many years ago. And any of those meanings will be picked up by the tool, and it will be allocated into the correct area for that context and meaning of the word. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Hey, excellent. So if
Another
you...
question coming in.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, a question on the data that you load into the system. You mentioned Office 365, which should be okay for companies to provide. But what about you mentioned also WhatsApp messages and all other digital platforms that you could put into the system, but how do you obtain that data? And do you need consent from people? And what about the privacy issues?
They're great questions. There's lots in there. So the first thing is it has to be owned by the corporate entity. Okay, so it would have to be a corporate WhatsApp. It could be Slack, for example. It could be Google chat rooms, but because we do need consent from someone or somewhere. Okay, the consent typically would come from the corporate entity. There will be a process if an investigation is started. That consent is given by default because we're then allowed access to that corpus of data and to be able to run the process for you. There is also a question mark around the privacy, and I think so far I've only really spoken about using our tool as a kind of a post hoc activity. So the privacy thing becomes less of an issue because there is a process where there is a sign off within an organization that they're going to run a formal investigation. Okay. However, if you are in a territory, so for example, we have some engagements in the Middle East, okay, where they're looking at how they could use this tool as a permanent monitoring capability, okay, because one of the things it will pick up is these anomalies, and you can start to try and preempt some of this activity. That also applies potentially in financial services, okay, because if you join a financial services organization now, you sign away the right to be able to have your emails belong only to you because they belong to the company, because they are actively trying to prevent fraudulent behavior and activity. By using this tool, you would be able to potentially identify how people's behavior has changed, and it would put up a red flag, and you would then be able to start to drill down into this element of the tool and start to identify if that does represent some form of threat to the organization. Yeah? Again, because we've categorized all these terms and put them into a platform that is then easily used, like using the IPTC. Again, if you think about that, removes bias. Again, okay. The big thing I focus on here is in an investigation, it's about removing bias constantly. Because the biggest problem with bias is it has a negative impact on an investigation and actually elongates the process significantly, because we don't actually end up finding the things that could support the case, because we only go looking for the things we know we were looking for. So this particular case, this was, when I say long-term, 7 years, I think, in total. They ended up with about 4 years' worth of data for a long-term financial markets fraud. Every major bank got settled in the US. The investigation continues in Europe. And one of the challenges they had was, because the corpus of data was complex, it was difficult, it was multi-language, they were struggling to identify meaningful extracts that they could use to support their investigation. Now, we actually got introduced into this case by Oculus Financial Intelligence, and we were working then with the law firm that were fronting the case. So you can see there, 300 gigabytes of unstructured data. It's big. This was a big chunk of data. This was 4 years worth of communications. As you can see there, lots of it was audio. There was Bloomberg chat rooms that we had to decipher and turn them into a usable context. We input all of that into the tool, and out of that, as I said, within a couple of hours, we basically identified the key players, and then within probably 2 weeks, we'd identified, by supporting the law firm, various activities that supported their case that they hadn't found previously. Now, we came in very late into this case because we actually did this really as a proof of concept, because they said they would help us develop the tool. But if this had been around when they started their case 4 years ago, we would have saved them literally hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds just on product cost alone of using e-discovery tools, because this would have identified very quickly what they required, and then they could extract that information and export it and put it into their case management platform. Okay, so instead of buying it for the whole data set, they buy it for the piece that's important for their case. So the other use case I mentioned very briefly there is around compliance, and that what we're talking about here is looking at using it as a much more proactive activity. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and go through all of this. The deck is there, but fundamentally what we're saying here is if you could provide an organization with preemptive alerts that there is potentially going to be some form of change of behavior in an individual that could drive towards fraudulent or corrupt activity, it would be quite useful to know that. The biggest challenge with that, obviously, is GDPR compliance, privacy rules. No one likes the word monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. As I said, the very first part of this tool is monitoring nothing. All it's doing is looking at the communication flows to build the network graphic. Okay. And all that network graphic is showing you over time as you move through it is how people's importance has changed. And that's just based upon who they're talking to, how frequent they do, how important the people are that they talk to, et cetera, et cetera. And so that gives you the ability to start to identify anomalous behavior, because why has Joe just suddenly become really important? He should never be sat at the top of the tree. You know, we run a demonstration on this. If you're interested, we can set up a demo. It's run on the Enron corpus, but we interestingly found some superb information in that other organizations haven't found, because we were looking at it differently. And you know, we found, for example, one of the main protagonists in the Enron case, I mean, he literally got given sort of almost global sign-off to increase every single trader's what do we call it? Credit limit. Okay. And so he suddenly became the most important person overnight, and we'd have picked that up. So the second part then is really looking at, if we then think there has been a compliance breach, is kind of how do we do that information. What's interesting is that this whole area here, looking at spot checks, okay, again, we know anecdotally that we extract parts of a communication corpus and it gets sent offshore, and it will be sent to an organization who will then manually go through those communications, looking to try and identify if there has been any fraudulent type activity based upon keyword search. Okay, this would do that for you. It's automated. So the process, very simply put, is we take the communications, we ingest them into the system, What we then do is we run our analysis against it, okay? And as I said, the key thing here is to bear in mind that this is completely unsupervised learning. We don't have to send in an army of people to teach the tool what to look for, how to load the data, how to build the network, who's important, what's the case all about. It's all irrelevant because the platform just teaches itself and brings up the anomalies. Then what we do is once we've ingested all of that data, the final part of it is we present that back to you on a bunch of dashboards which are customizable, should you require them to be. So the first thing we've talked about was this a capability to run through a guided search, okay, and we can take these inputs from multiple places. The first thing we're looking for is this prestige. So the first thing you will see when using this tool is you will see an image like this, and what this is about, this shows you how people interact with each other. Okay, and on the left-hand side, for example, in this Enron corpus, it's 110,000 emails, I think, and there's 10,000 active users here. And out of those 10,000, we're showing that these people here are the most prestigious based upon how and who they communicate with in the organization. Okay. And another great example in this particular model is as we drill down, there was a chap in this scenario called Vince Kaplinski. Okay? He became overnight the most important person in Enron. Okay? So never was there the CIO or the CEO or the board sat in this box here. And Vince Kaplinski was important because he suddenly, when everything was going bad, switched on the ability to send his entire email, his corporate email, to an AOL account. And the reason he was doing that was because he was actively involved and knowledgeable of the fraudulent activities that were taking place, and he was looking to protect himself before anything got deleted. Okay. But you wouldn't have picked that up. How would you know that? Without some form of technology capability. We can extend the capability of our Prestige Explorer and start to show the entire network. So if you're in a very large organization, as much as that looks a bit like a spider's web, but when you see it on a screen, it does actually mean something. And what we're able to show is both internal and external email capability. So we're looking at people that email into the organization as well, because they become important. Again, we were able to see, not necessarily related to the downfall of Enron, but we absolutely saw where there was bribery going on, people going out for dinner, going to sporting events, and a chap that basically was trying to win a massive contract, took the CFO out for dinner, and then donuts for breakfast, and so on and so forth. So all of this information, see, but all of that information supports the case, right? So once we've identified the anomalies within and how people's prestige has changed, this then moves down to this natural language understanding capability. So as you can see here, the first thing we're doing is we built, it's actually an awful graphic, but in here we've brought out the tags. So we've got, for example, politics, and I can't remember what that one is, and then there's an entertainment and going out for dinner, and we can drill further down because this removes the need as an investigative team to build out search criteria, right? Because we build search terms because the tool doesn't know the language that it's supposed to be looking for. So what this does is this takes you from there, and it takes you from entertainment, and then under entertainment there's cafe, restaurant, bar. If you click on restaurants, it will bring up every single communication in that corpus that took place in a restaurant, or the word restaurant was mentioned, or the name of a restaurant was mentioned. And then you can drill down, for example, under restaurants, we then were able to go down into there, and then it starts to show you what was talked about with the restaurant. Okay, were they talking about going to Barbados? Were they talking about going to the Bulls game, etc., etc.? Does that all make sense so far? Yeah. So we put all of that together into this sort of top view, and this then shows us really how the communication flows work. And that then leads us on to the final screen, which is the prestige change. Because if you remember, I mentioned that when someone's prestige change, it gets shown up as an anomaly. Okay, because why? And that's the pointer to then start an investigation, because someone's prestige has changed unnaturally from the baseline of behavior within an organization. So what does that all mean? Okay, I'm a big